Good evening and welcome to another edition of Face to Face, where we talk with local radio and television personalities one-on-one. Today on my show I have a person who is a native of Chicago, was mayor of Sioux Falls during the 70s, and now has his own university, an official university program on the radio 2 to 6 every weekday on KSOO. I am today with Dean of Admissions at Viewpoint University, Rick Knobe. Thank you, Rick, for being here today.
I think it's going to be a pleasure. I'll let you know when this is over.
So, Rick, besides your radio show, what else do you do?
Besides doing radio, 20 hours, live radio, 20 hours a week on KSOO, I do editorials for KSFY Television on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and those two things pay me money. The other things that I do that don't pay me money, I'm involved in about 3 or 4 different citizen boards. I'm on the Zoological Society board. I chair the local council of governments. I'm on the board of the Husby Performing Arts Center at the Washington Pavilion. And my latest venture into insanity is I'm starting to raise buffalo. Really? Yes.
How does that?
Well, we did this radio has been an interesting catalyst for things that I've done in my life. When I was did radio when I first moved to Sioux Falls back in '71. I did a local talk show here, and out of that local talk show came my run for mayor of Sioux Falls, and that was an interesting thing. Well, earlier this spring, we had, my radio partner and I had read an Associated Press story about the number of buffalo that were being raised in South Dakota, and they gave this guy's name from out in Newell, South Dakota, which is kind of sort of out in the middle of nowhere. So we called the guy up and had a great conversation with him about raising buffalo. And about a week after that, my radio partner Randy said, you know, that sounds pretty easy, we should try that. So we called the guy back up again and started asking about how we start a buffalo herd and this is all going on the radio. And the guy said, well, you should start off with a couple of bred heifers. And of course we played the stupid nincompoops, which is easy for us to do when it comes to farming stuff, and said, what's a bred heifer? And he started laughing, and I said, is that like a pregnant girl buffalo? And he said, yeah, that's what it is. So we started this whole deal. I formed an LLC. I'm working on building fence right now. And later on this month, I'm going to be going out West River and picking up some buffalo, and I'm going to start my own herd.
All right.
And we're going to take out Ted Turner. That's the big goal. The long-term goal is we're going to take out Ted Turner.
All right. Well, you've been on the radio for many, many years.
Yes.
Can you give me some background, before you started on radio? Like I said, when I started, I was surprised to learn you're a native from Chicago. I find that a mayor of Sioux Falls, was not born in Sioux Falls.
Hey, those of us from Chicago, we know how to get the job done. No. I had, when I graduated from high school back in 1964, many moons ago, I went to Morningside College down in Sioux City. And out of that experience, again, for fun and games, I played in a rock and roll band. The rock and roll band I played in traveled over the upper Midwest, including Sioux Falls. And so I was familiar with the town. Through various other things that happened in my life, I ended up back in Sioux City back in the late 60s and was working in a music store in Sioux City called Flood Music. Also, I was doing radio down in Sioux City at KSCJ. One day a gentleman came in and he bought a guitar, and he paid for the guitar with a check from KIWA radio station in Sheldon, Iowa. So we started talking about radio and what was going on in the radio market, and he said he was starting a station in Sioux Falls. So I sent him a tape, and he hired me. So I moved here. My first day on the air in Sioux Falls was May 1st, 1971. And 3 years later, I was sworn in as mayor, May 6, 1974. And the radio talk show really kind of catapulted me into that deal, plus the politics of the time in the country. Richard Nixon was president, Spiro Agnew had resigned, Watergate was going on. It was an ugly time for incumbents. And so I happened to be just young enough and brash enough not to know that I couldn't run and win, and so I ran, and I won. So that's how I got into the political thing. And then served 10 years in City Hall, and then worked in Aberdeen for 18 months, which was a really unique experience, which we don't talk about much. And then came back to Sioux Falls and started working in radio at one radio station here in town. I was subsequently fired from that job. That was a unique experience too. Everybody needs to get fired at least once in their life. It's a very character building thing. You don't try to get yourself fired, but sometimes Getting fired can be a good thing. It causes you to assess things. And then I started doing radio at KSOO actually 10 years ago in November. Started doing Viewpoint, and then the thing has grown from a 1-hour show to 4 hours. And we have VPU now, is what we call it, Viewpoint University, a campus without walls, no tuition, no parking problems, no book fees, no nothing. You get what you pay for at VPU.
Oh,
there you go.
Well, you started in radio in the early 60s?
Actually, radio was, down in Sioux City, my radio on-air stuff was very limited. My first job at KSCJ in Sioux City was traffic manager, which for those of you who are not initiated is the most tedious job in the world, creating the logs by which the commercials are played and the programs are run. And I did an hour on the air over the noon hour. So that was in the late 60s, early 70s. And then my first full-time on-air thing was 1971.
Why did you want to go into radio?
I'd always been interested in broadcasting, although I never really knew I was interested in it. When I played in the rock and roll band, we traveled all over the upper Midwest and met a lot of disc jockeys that were playing top 40 music at the time. And I kind of liked that. But I liked, and this was before talk radio was popular, I liked engaging people in conversations. And as a matter of fact, it's difficult for me sitting here answering your questions. I'd rather be asking you questions. So, you know, if I start going after you, you know, tell me to back off. And I've always enjoyed that, meeting people, talking to people. And that got me into broadcasting.
Who were your role models growing up in this field?
There was a guy in Chicago, Illinois, worked for WGN, which stood for World's Greatest News, WGN Radio. His name was Wally Phillips. And my father and mother, that's when the radio was on in our house and my mom and dad were around, that's what you listened to, was Wally Phillips. And he was on in the morning. He was very conversational. He was non-confrontational. He would talk about things that were going on. He would talk to listeners that would call in about various things. And it was a very enjoyable experience, and I like that. One of my other role models was on the rock and roll side of things, a guy by the name of Dick Biondi, who worked at WLS in Chicago, which at that time was the world's largest store, which was Sears. This is back in the 60s, and he was a nut, an absolute nut. He would do stupid, silly, crazy things on the air. But when you're 15, 16, and 17 years old, that's the coolest thing going. And so WGN with mom and dad, WLS in the privacy of my room.
Did you have any education, like in high school and college, for this profession, or was it kind of just hands-on experience?
I was not in theater or anything like that in high school, didn't do any of that. Took one speech class in high school. We didn't have communications departments like you have now. There wasn't at the high school level broadcasting or journalism as a course thing. I did attend a vocational school down in Kansas City, Missouri, which at that time was called Career Academy of Broadcasting. You could learn radio or television, and they also had a sideline teaching girls how to set hair. It was truly a unique place. But anyway, I went to that course, and it was a 4-month course, and the first part of it was radio. And then the second part, the first 2 months or 2.5 months was radio, and then the last month and a half was supposed to be television. And to show you what these people thought of me, they graduated me in 2.5 months. They said, once you're through with the radio thing, you're done, you're out of here, we're giving you an A, go ahead and go on. And I said, well, what about the television part? And they said, you're going to be great in radio. And the bottom line was, I have a great face for radio and not a great face for television. And so they gave me my degree, and I got out of there. They also didn't give me any of my money back, which really infuriated me. But that's where I went, and then I subsequently went on to Sioux City, as I said, and then came up here. And now that I'm doing a little bit of television, I would love to find those people again and go, nah, 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 nah. But I'm bigger than that. I won't do that. That would be tawdry and trashy and beneath my dignity. Okay.
So you came up to Sioux Falls.
Yep.
You started. When did you start Viewpoint?
Viewpoint started approximately 10 years ago. It was right after The Hinken family, who had owned KSOO since day one, sold it. And the new ownership was interested in making some shifts and changes and things, as new owners are prone to do. And the general manager, the new general manager, had heard about my career in Sioux Falls and thought it would be interesting to get me back on the air. And so he called me, and we started doing a 1-hour show from 11 till 12, Monday through Friday. And then it grew to 90 minutes, and then it grew to 2 hours, and then it, you know, did this and did that. I ended up signing on early in the morning at 6 a.m. for about 3 or 4 years, and ultimately now I'm doing 2 to 6.
Wow. How is that different from the stuff that you did, you know, in the early 70s? And well, were you a DJ, like a music DJ, or? Well,
the job that I had at KCHF, my first job up here, was a combination of music and talk. We did, I was on the air for 6.5 hours a day, from 6 a.m. until 12:30. And we started doing talk about 9 to 9:30 in the morning, and then it went from 9 to 10, and then 10 to 11, and then pretty soon it was pretty much all talk and a little bit of music. So I kind of got rid of the music and did the conversation, because people were clamoring for it. At that time in the history of the country, the Vietnam War was going on. There were huge debates going on about abortion, much hotter debates than are going on right now, because Roe v. Wade was just being talked about. It wasn't even decided until '73. There was a lot of discussion about legalizing marijuana and that whole drug culture thing. And so people were just clamoring for a place to talk about those kinds of things. And the boss that I had provided me the opportunity to provide that environment, and so I did.
So you have this, you know, you start off with music, then you kind of morph with music / talk, and then you morph into talk.
Right.
Which one did you like better? Did you like?
I love talk. I absolutely love talk radio.
Why is that?
Because it does a couple of things. It gives people a chance to be heard, that won't take the time to write the letter to the editor or anything like that. It gives the listeners a chance to hear people whose opinions may be really strange or weird or even sometimes dumb, but it gives people a chance, society a chance to hear the plethora of ideas and feelings there are out there about a wide variety of issues. And for me, every day is a learning thing. I mean, we joke about VPU and I'm the dean and I'm supposed to know everything, but the reality is that you know, I learn stuff each and every day. It's like me going to class, except I'm getting paid. I love it.
What have you seen different about radio, like when you started it, you know, in the 60s, 70s, 80s? What's different about radio today that you've seen, like just subtle changes or major changes?
Well, I think the major changes, if you know, I'm sure most of the people listening to this in the studio, they don't listen to talk radio. I'm sure most of them don't. Most of them listen. I can probably name the 3 radio stations that the 3 of you listen to, the 3 stations that most of you listen to. I could pick you up and I could move you to Sioux City or Des Moines or Lincoln, and except for the call letters of the station, you wouldn't be able to tell the difference from a station in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. It's like going to a shopping mall. Once you've been in one, you've been in a mall. So most of the music stations in the country are just prepackaged. There isn't much individuality, isn't much personality. The liner cards are set. Everything is set specifically the way, what they're supposed to say, when they're supposed to say it. There's very little ad lib. There's very little creativity. It's all a prepackaged deal that the station owners want because they've hired a consultant and a consultant has told them this is the way you do it. And I think that's a big change. And I think it's a bad change.
Really?
Oh, yeah. I think that there are really talented people. The building that I'm in is filled with really talented people, and yet the folks that are in the you know, my part of the environment, we're the ones that really get to exercise the creativity. I don't have any pre-posted liner cards. I don't have anything that the only things I'm absolutely positively supposed to do are play the commercials and get to the network news at the top of the hour. Everything else, I get to do exactly what I want to do. I don't get any interference from management or anybody telling me what I have to do. The music formats, it's you'll play this song at this time, and here's the intro to it, and you'll give the time and temperature at this time, and it sounds very spontaneous, which is the gift of the people that are doing it. But in reality, and this isn't just the company I work for, I mean, this is radio, I think, all across the country. There's very little true creativity out there anymore on the music side of things. Everything's prepackaged, pre-programmed, and that's the way it is.
Okay, well, we've got two different types of questions. I've got a list of questions people have asked me, and we also have a studio audience here today.
Who are just chomping at the bit for the opportunity to participate in this fine quality television program. I can just see it in their eyes.
But one of the questions I got here, when I told people I was going to be asking, I had a chance to interview today, one of their biggest ones was they wanted to know your opinion on shock jocks. What do you feel, people like Howard Stern, Don Imus, all these ones that will do anything for the audience, for the big audience ratings and all that. What's your opinion on that?
They do a great job of getting and holding an audience because you never know what they're going to say next. Stern, to be totally honest with you, I've never listened to Stern. I've heard about what he does. I have no interest in listening to that kind of stuff. Radio announcers, shock jocks that belittle people, that tear them apart, that don't let people complete sentences or complete ideas, I have no time for them. Because while the audience may love it when they say, go get that stupid SOB or whatever, the next day, the person that said that may be that stupid SOB. And he may feel the wrath of that kind of behavior. And so while I know it's extremely popular, I don't like it. Imus used to be viewed as a shock jock. If you listen to him now on KSOO from 6 until 10, Monday through Friday morning, he's bawdy, he can be controversial, and every once in a while he's a little vulgar. But he brings in great guests and does great interviews. So I can tolerate him. But Stern, if I had a chance to listen to Howard Stern or go get my teeth filled, I'd go get cavities filled. I have no interest in that whatsoever.
We do have a question in the audience.
I would like to know, you talked about how you have lots of anything can happen during your radio station show. What kind of stuff do you normally talk about, though? Because I assume most of your listeners probably aren't teenagers. What's the kind of stuff that interests your listeners?
What is your target audience?
The target audience we have is, first of all, anybody that's breathing with a brain. I mean, that's a pretty broad range. But we primarily target the audience is 25 years of age and older. I like the subjects that we talk about are things that I find interesting. I don't try and talk about stuff that I'm not interested in because it shows that you don't care or aren't interested in it. I love politics. I'm fascinated with politics. So a lot of the stuff we talk about, City Hall, when the school board does something brilliant or something stupid, we love to talk about that kind of stuff. When the legislature's in session, that's a big subject matter. When the president gets in trouble for doing things grown men aren't supposed to do with young girls, we spend a lot of time talking about that. Those are the general things. But it varies. We've talked about music groups of the 1960s, interviewed a lot of people that are in that industry. We've talked about a lot of religious subject matters. It varies, but it's always stuff that myself or my radio partner are interested in, because then you can genuinely do the interview without saying, how do you feel about this, sir? And, where it's a canned deal and it just sounds horrible. So it's stuff we're interested in. And we think the audience is interested in it too. And we have had numerous, I'm not going to say how many because I don't know, but I've been surprised, pleasantly surprised, at the 19-year-olds, the 18-year-olds, and when school's out of session, we try and do things that would appeal to your age group. And we even have a segment of the program called Youth Viewpoint now. It's Student VPU is what we call it now, where we have students from the local high schools come in and we talk about stuff that is of interest to them.
What's been one of the most biggest issues you've had to talk about? I mean, one of the just, you almost would have to break out the bleep button because people are so passionate about.
Well, when the impeachment thing was going on with Bill Clinton, I mean, that went on for a long, long time, and people were passionate about that on both sides of the issue. So that was a hot subject matter. The tragedy at Plankinton, we spent hours talking about that, and that's not over yet. I mean, that's going to go on for quite a while, and people are passionate about that. And then there's various little side things that come up that are important to the community. There's this big debate going on now with the county commission about what to do with the Coliseum and whether they're going to tear it down or keep it up. And there are people who are very passionate about that on both sides of the issue. So it's an ebb and flow of community events that keeps us going.
If you could think of one program that you really just, it always sticks in your mind, what is it? When was it?
Oh, geez, there's been so many of them over the years. The one that there is a couple of things that we've done that have literally brought me to tears on the air, where I had to shut off the microphone and, do that. When the plane went down that killed Governor George Mickelson and those folks, I knew all but two people on that plane. They were friends of mine, or I'd worked with them over the years. And the day after that tragedy, we just opened up the microphone and started talking about that and had people call in. And there were points during that program when I cried. And so I had to shut the microphone off, go to a commercial break, and get myself back into focus again. We did a show, and this turned into, it started off just as an open topic day, and we got into the subject of adoption. And that was at a period of time when there were a lot of people, there were some court cases and state legislatures dealing with the issue of whether or not the child who was adopted ought to have access to the records of their biological parents, so they could find out, if they wanted to, who their biological parents were, as opposed to what I call their real parents, the people that raised them. And there was a young woman that called in, and I say young, she was in her 30s, who was adopted. And she had gone through the process of finding out about the history of her biological mother and father. And it was kind of a double-edged sword. She was grateful at finding out about where she came from biologically, but then she was equally grateful that she was adopted, because the history of her biological family was horrible, and she wasn't even sure she would be alive today. And I have adopted a child. I adopted a child when she was 5 months old, and so I've been through that parenting thing, and the passion with which she talked about it brought me to tears. Those are two that come to mind immediately.
We have another question in the audience.
What is your position on video lottery, and do you think that religion should be involved?
Ooh, okay.
Have you talked about that on your
Oh, yeah. We've spent a lot of time talking about that one. I'll tell you, I have done not just a 180 or a 360 or a 570. I mean, I've gone around in circles on this over the 10 years that video lottery's been around. My position now, and this sounds really crass, but here's what it is. How do I say this? There's no gentle way to say this. If you want to put money in a machine that has the high likelihood of taking that money away from you, if you want to do that, you ought to have the right to do that. You ought to be able to do that. I can't stop you from doing behavior that's going to hurt you, short of shackling you, and we all know how society feels about that. So while I don't love video lottery, and I don't play, I mean, I haven't put $1 in those machines in probably 5 years, and I was never one of those addicted type players, because I don't care. I'm having a problem with us saying that this is a horrible, evil, nasty business. And if we're going to go after video lottery because of its negative effect on families and its negative effect upon the business climate, why don't we go after alcohol? Because that has done more harm to society over the years than video lottery has done in the 10 years it's been in business. That people who are addicted to alcohol and the behavior they exhibit is really destructive to society. And yet, it's legal, it's licensed, the state taxes it, the counties tax it, the cities tax it. Everybody makes money off of that sin and that vice. And so I think it's a little hypocritical for us to say, you can't play video lottery, but if you want to go down to the bar and drink, we'll take the tax money that comes from that. That's okay. But I don't want you to play video lottery. I think it's hypocritical. For the religious folks to get involved in the thing, I understand their position, but, and I'm going to get in trouble with my religious friends, I think they are being hypocritical, because, where were they when all the damage was done from alcohol? Where were they with all the damage that's been done from smoking. And if you're going to go after gambling, bingo can be equally as addictive as gambling, as other forms of gambling. There are people who are addicted to bingo. Are they going to shut down the bingo parlors in the churches? Of course they're not going to do that because they view that as recreational. I respect their right to say what they're saying, but as I back off and take a look at it, with all due respect to the bishop and the others who are intimately involved in this, I think it's hypocritical. But
Yeah.
hey, it makes for great talk radio.
Well, we're almost out of time here. We have time for one more quick question.
One more. Speaking of the town's affairs, what do you think about the east-west corridor and going through the country club? Do you think the country club ought to just make room to get that through, or you think
No.
that's their choice? Or?
No. There's a lot of issues there besides, quote, the country club. I know that everybody likes to go after rich people and rich people's recreational activity. But the bottom line is, in my opinion, and the mayor and I disagreed on this along with several other issues, but the bottom line was to take that green space and chop it up into a highway and chop it up into houses, I think would have been very, very short-sighted. 50, 75, or 100 years from now, that green space in the center of the city is going to be a mecca like Central Park is in New York. And the fact that it happens to be a private country club or a couple of private country clubs, it's still green space, it's still open space, and we need as much of that as we can get in this country.
You think eventually that's going to become public? You don't think it'll stay private?
I don't know what's going to happen to it long term. I honestly don't know. But it's green, it's open. Sure, it's not accessible for everybody, but it's not doing anybody any harm either. And if you choose to live on the west side of town and drive to your job in the central part of the city or up in the industrial park, that's a personal choice you've made. Yeah. And I think it's, again, a little short-sighted for people to say, I got to have that short route. Why didn't you move closer to your job? Why didn't you move closer to wherever? Why do I have to build a 5-lane, 7-lane, 9-lane street for your convenience when you should have been the one that made a better choice about where you lived? That'll get them rolling too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Mr. Knobe, we're close to out of time here, and I have to say, as I knew before I was going to sit down today talking with you, I knew you were going to have lots of opinions, and it's a good thing you do. You do a wonderful job.
Thank you.
I thank you for joining us today, Rick Knobe, and I thank you too for joining us here today on Face to Face, and I hope you turn in for the next edition of Face to Face. I'm Avi Forstein. Good night.